Hello and welcome to NIAGA Spotlight with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. NIAGA Spotlight goes through the weekend economic analysis and future affairs. Now today on Future Affairs, we're looking at AI for business, trends and threats in 2025. Now ASEAN's AI market is expected to grow to a staggering $13 billion by 2025, not too far away, presenting both vast opportunities and challenges for organizations and governments in the region to adapt and regulate AI technologies effectively. Now the scale of this expansion is evident in recent global market developments. Less than 2 years after launch, Microsoft expects its AI business to scale to $10 billion in annual revenues. AI will thus significantly shape business landscapes in Malaysia and across ASEAN, driving innovation, productivity, and efficiency for diverse industries, including manufacturing, finance, healthcare. Now, NIAGA Spotlight today looks at key areas as well as threats that come with this continued development and use of AI, such as workforce displacement, cybersecurity risks, and of course, ethical concerns around data privacy and how best to address them. Jean-F. Queralt, founder and CEO with the I/O Foundations, joins me now live in the studios for this discussion. A very good morning, Jean. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Fantastic. So, Jean, let's try and perhaps first frame the entire structure before we get deeper into the discussion. Tell me about how you are perceiving artificial intelligence, AI, and the landscape, how it's looking today at the end of 2024, all the way but briefly, of course, since the first time it came into the public consciousness back in, 1955 with John McCarthy's speech at Dartmouth.
All right, so let me start making a disclaimer. I did not use ChatGPT to prepare any of this show.
All right, I love that. I love that.
So let's first try to frame a little bit as to what do we understand by AI, because that typically gets lost into the conversation. We jump into big conversations about what's going to be the effect, or what's going to be the impact, or what's going to be the advantages, without necessarily understanding exactly what it is that we are playing with. So AI, as most people would know at this point, is short for artificial intelligence. So the question is, what do you mean by intelligence? Humans in general, we are basically automatons. We are trying to figure out ways to predict what's going to be the next thing that we need to do, or how we can optimize a specific process that serves our purposes. So that means feeding our families, or earning some money for a business, etc., etc. Every time that we've been using some type of automation process, of optimization process, is being with the finality of generating something that reduces the cost of the output, but with an output that serves some type of purpose for us. Now, those outputs are going to be humanly designed or humanly oriented because they have to serve a purpose for us. We are the final receivers of those. Now, what that means is every time we're going to be automating those things, we are looking into the exact same of output types. So when we look into AI, which is basically a piece of software, what we expect from that piece of software is to provide us with outputs and with solutions that are a response to the needs that we have as humans. What that implies is that it's going to be duplicating what we tend to do as humans on that piece of software. And that's the general overlook that we have to have as to what we are playing with. If you're familiar with the Turing test. Back in the days, it was a matter of figuring out whether me talking with something or someone on the other side of a computer, whether I was going to be fooled as to believe that that person would be or not a human. So if I wasn't able to make the difference as to whether that was a human person or not, and if it happened to be a machine, you would assume that it has passed the Turing test.
That's right.
But that is because it's reacting in a way that I can identify as a human, or that I can extract satisfaction out of it.
So that you can basically predict that this is likely a human rather than a machine-generated response. Right.
And so what we're trying to do is to replicate that at scale with AI software.
Exactly.
And the consideration is going to be what kind of intelligence measurement we're going to have on that piece of software, and what are the outputs that we want to extract out of that software, and for which purposes we want that output. What kind of element are we optimizing for? basically.
Exactly. So when we speak of optimization, that of course brings us very strategically back into the discussion, John, about accelerating adoption of AI-driven automation and what kind of impacts this is actually going to be having on the workforce. Let's look at Malaysian businesses especially, because also another critical issue to look at would be widening income inequality together with job displacements. So what type of an approach can governments by and large actually be taking to ensure that, yes, we are getting the full benefits of this rapid adoption of AI, but at the same time you're ensuring that workforce-wise, this is also equitably distributed?
Right, so let's think for a second about the question of automation. Is one of the reasons why I wanted to frame before as to what is it that we're doing with AI. We're basically modeling persons. Or the outputs that a person would do, provided with enough resources or enough energy to be able to generate those outputs. So if you, for instance, meet someone for the first time and that person gives you an advice, you're going to take that advice with a grain of salt, because you're not exactly sure how that advice might be generated. As you interact with that person further, you get to trust more that person. And you may take their advice much more seriously, or you may act upon it much more directly. That's what we understand by automation. So the question is, my AI gives me a result. Am I automating automatically? Am I taking that result at face value that it is the best way to proceed? Or am I actually analyzing a little bit? Hold on a second, I'm going to be making some judgment here as to whether that output is the right one or not. We have to look at AIs as advisors.
Not as the ones that are actually performing the entire life cycle of a task. Fair enough. Okay.
So in certain aspects, yes, I may want AI to be able to do the whole cycle of things. So for instance, if I need a positioning between pallets of a storage facility, well, yeah, very likely. But you have to make decisions that may impact other people much more directly. I may want to just take one specific AI and just evaluate the output and go with it. Now, there's one other element that is quite I wouldn't say ignored, but just overlooked, which is going back to the same effect. So again, the reason why I wanted to frame that as people is because most of what we're going through with AI reflects exactly how we have been behaving as humans across history. And we could just extract lessons of that to try to figure out how we're going to be tackling with AI itself. So most people go to ChatGPT or any other model, and they just use one model. Therefore, the advice that they get is from only one source.
Fair enough.
What really happens is, in the normal life, is I meet you, I meet 3 other more people, I have a doubt, and I'm just asking you, and you, and you, and you, and as many people as I can. And I try to collect all that collective feedback and try to figure out my way and just make a decision out of it.
Diversity of perspectives.
In a way. And so the problem that we have is that right now we have all of this idea that we're going to be automating one specific output all the time, with one specific model for one specific. It's not necessarily going to be the best of outcomes. Now, when it comes to the problem with the workforce, you have an issue in terms of what governments will want to prioritize, and that is not an easy answer. As in, we tend to think that the progression of AI outputs and the benefits that it's going to give us is linear, because it's easy for a human to think linearly. In reality, it's going to be exponential. And humans do not think well exponentially. It's very difficult for us to think in exponential terms. And so the actual outcomes of a specific policy for a given government as to whether they're going to be benefiting more the technology versus benefiting or protecting the workers, that is something that no one has solved so far.
Absolutely. And I think you raise an excellent point, because you're talking about predicting this technological innovation. So let's move swiftly, Jean, now into regulatory frameworks. And around ASEAN, I think we're seeing some movement, especially over the last year, when it comes to, in particular, sovereignty and data privacy. Are these developments positive, and how does it lend to the wider ecosystem of perhaps having a regulatory idea around how AI is impacting ASEAN economies?
So that answer would have a number of parts, in my opinion. The first one is each of our government will have to determine what is it that they want the AIs to do and what it is that they don't want them to do. And the only way they're going to be able to make sure that that is really respected is ensuring that the code of those AIs have specific provisions that stop them from doing certain things and enable them to do certain other things. That is always going to be a local decision because different cultures, different jurisdictions, different governments will have their own predetermined preferences, and it has to stay there. Now, there is, however, a very hidden actor that I find myself surprised that is not spoken enough from a regulatory perspective, which is freedom of expression. And allow me to make my case here. Because I'm not drumming a drum from a human rights perspective, I'm actually looking at it from a very specific process-oriented perspective.
All right.
So everyone who is using personal GPT models, say ChatGPT.
Like a lot of newsrooms are, for example.
Correct. Yeah. So everything is about you do a prompting, so you do a number of questions or what's called prompt engineering into the model, and the model gives you an output. Now, given a certain same model, if 25 people would use exactly the same model, the quality of the output would be exactly proportional to the quality of their input.
Fair enough.
And
absolutely.
So the more trained I am to be able to express my ideas, the more freely as possible through a typical A/B testing situation, eventually one person is going to have a better output than the others, and it will be the one who is able to express themselves as openly as possible and as straightforwardly as possible, so that the output achieves what is expected. Now, for one single person, that might not be too much of a problem, but at scale, in a whole country, those countries who are going to be encouraging the population to just go and talk to that machine, see what happens.
Right.
And, we don't mind so much about the output. We want the best output for the specific situation, versus those who are going to be telling you, you cannot talk about this, you cannot say about that, you cannot opinionate about this. Obviously, at scale, and exponentially, again, very difficult for us to evaluate, you're going to see that eventually certain countries are not going to be able to keep the pace. And those who have encouraged people to be able to do experiment as much as possible will definitely come up with solutions way faster.
Absolutely. So then you're looking at basically big tranches of economies that benefit and those that might see some unexpected outcomes.
Yes.
All right, fantastic. I think that was a very clear way to sort of frame that issue at least. Now, looking at AI's potential to reshape the way in which industries globally are managed. We're talking about, healthcare, manufacturing. Let's look at what role ASEAN nations, which by and large are still quite dependent on that middle area trap, so to speak, of being stuck between manufacturing and digitization. What role can we play in fostering international collaboration on AI standards and ethical guidelines?
So I always have a problem with the word ethical, because my question is always whose ethics?
Whose ethics? Absolutely.
Every single country, every single culture has their own ethical framework, and once you try to put everything in the international arena, where everyone is going to be discussing or talking to each other, or even have AIs talking to each other and exchanging data, or when you have data moving across jurisdictions, what you have is a clash of ethical frameworks as to what should I do with this data, what not, what should be applied, and so forth. So that's already an issue, and I've been in the space for quite some time already. The IO Foundation was founded in 2018, and I keep asking this question anywhere that I go. No one gives me an answer, because there's actually no answer to it. The element of standardization is quite interesting. It's a bit of a conundrum. Because we might be talking a lot about what big companies are doing with those systems. However, specifically in ASEAN, there isn't that much participation, active participation from countries in ASEAN to participate in those spaces, in standardization. There is a little bit, just not enough. And so we want to not be overwhelmed or bulldozed by all of these technologies, but we are not in the room, we're not sitting in the rooms where all of those things are being discussed and where all those things are being standardized. And it's always the same problem. If you're not in the room, someone else is. And so it's a matter of starting promoting a broader participation of ASEAN into those technical standard environments. There's also an element of exponential growth that I was mentioning before. So there was this movie called The Hummingbird Effect, the Hummingbird Project, where basically they were trying to trace cable to go faster to I think it was Wall Street, to be able to just basically do microtransactions faster than others.
Right.
Because it was a matter of that micro millisecond to be able to
making all the difference.
Correct.
Yes.
And this is going to be the same for the AI. The faster they go, the faster outputs we're going to get. And the standards that define those things are, again, discussed in those rooms, and we need to be there as much as possible.
So the interesting or slight offshoot from that would be the current conversation that's going on with social media regulation, particularly for teens and those under 16 years of age. Australia has already passed some landmark legislation. Malaysia is said to be looking at the same. But again, I think it brings up the bigger question of the fact that AI definitely, and its integration into everything from including our social media feeds, is what has made it perceptually at least and threat-wise a little more of a risky arena, especially for younger people. But can you ever standardize? Much to think about. So from there, Jean, let's...
Can you standardize education?
Yeah, can you standardize education? But more than standardizing education, perhaps it's about should not the responsibility then fall back onto the OS, the operating systems themselves, rather than tasking not just parents but wider governance structures to limit or to restrict or to quote-unquote ban?
But then you're passing the responsibility to a third party. And that becomes a bit problematic when it comes to deciding how you're going to be the upbringing of your children. So this conversation about whether the internet should be accessible for all or not, I have a bit of a hot take on that.
Sure, please share it.
If we think about equivalence, so transport, anyone can have a bicycle, and you don't need a license to go with a bicycle. There's certain places you cannot go because you can't go on a highway with a bicycle, but okay. You then want to move into a small bike, a small motorbike, 49 cc's. So a scooter, and okay, you still have to get you need to start getting a license. Then you want to move into getting a car, then you get a bigger license. You want a bigger motorbike, another different type of license. You want a truck, another one. And we take for granted that even inside the trucks, for instance, depending on the type of material that I'm going to be transporting, I still need a different license. And we understand the reason for that because there's a risk that we can measure, we can observe. If I drive a car without knowing what I'm doing, I'm just going to kill myself or kill others. When it comes to technology, there is such thing as having to look into what is the outcome based on the usage that you do a specific technology. And so it is not inconceivable to think that the access to the internet for certain purposes might be allowed for different ages and from different levels of knowledge. It is controversial to think that in order to have access to the internet, you may have to pass an exam, but it's not crazy to think that you have to pass an exam to drive a truck. And so when we look at the actual negative possible consequences, we have been able to agree on that. When it comes to just the use of technology, that conversation typically is banned. And I'm not advocating for keeping people away from the internet. That's not my point. My point is that we have to find a methodology to be able to prepare people to be able to use specific tools according to their knowledge level, or what the output that they want to generate.
Because digital fluency ultimately is what the aim is over here, so that we're best able to make use of it. Let's move quickly from there because it's also relevant and a perfect segue, Jean, into AI's growing role in misinformation and disinformation campaigns, especially in light of 2024's major elections, the biggest election year in recorded history and so far, and how increasingly when it comes to AI technologies, they are in fact being weaponized to a clear extent, which could undermine democracy. So where do we stand here, and what lessons did we take away from 2024 that can be applied for the years to come?
I'm old enough to remember a time when misinformation and disinformation was just called lies.
True.
So again, if we keep looking at AI as just a piece of software that is separated from us, we will still think about it as a third party. We have to think that what we are trying to do is to replicate our behaviors and the way that we operate, what we understand as intelligence, externalized and generated by a piece of software. And so it's going to be reflecting the way we think, because the way we think is the reason why we try to do things that serve us. So I try to grow food because it's interesting for me, and the way that I grow it is in the way that my intelligence is driving me to do it. So I know how to raise carrots not only by observation, but also because I have come up with methods to optimize the way, how many carrots can I get for square kilometer. And so when I'm going to be building a system, an AI in this case, that is going to be optimizing that for me and making it faster and with spending less water and maximizing the space for extra growth, it's basically going to be thinking pretty much like me. We are not inventing something that can think outside of the box than our own framework. And so what it means is when you are looking into how you're going to be tackling with lies, well, how do you tackle with lies with humans? Mm-hmm. You try to make sure that certain things have certain filters. You try to make sure that bad actors are not going to be involved in those decision-making processes. It's ludicrous to think that all AI is just going to be nice AIs.
Of course.
The way we train them, the way we optimize for a specific output for that particular piece of software is just going to be compliant with the expected output that you wanted from it. And so if my intention is to curtail the dissemination of a specific information that I have deemed to be negative or poisonous for whatever reason, the question becomes, who am I to determine that it's actually poisonous? So in other words, who watches the watchman? You can have a system that's going to be automating all of that control, but someone is still going to be making the decision as to what can and cannot pass. Someone determines the filter. Mm. And so in the end, you basically still have to deal with humans more than just machines.
Very true. And I think it also brings up an excellent opportunity to quickly interject that there are also, of course, technology CEOs globally who are basically re-engineering how the world lens through which our vast swaths of populations, hundreds of millions, view the world. Another very big conversation, but now let's quickly move into the widening gap between technologists who are driving AI innovation, Jean, and public sector policymakers, and how can that gap be effectively bridged to ensure that AI development then aligns with societal values?
So I actually like that question a lot because it's pretty much the core of what we do in the IO Foundation. We've been trying to figure out ways for that gap to be closed. And our conclusion so far has been that the main problem remains that we keep talking to engineers in ways that they don't necessarily understand because their way of thinking is problem solving. They want a specific puzzle to be able to tackle with it, and they require very specific instructions as what is it that you're expecting from them. Let me give you an example. Build me a social media network that respects freedom of expression.
Right. What does that entirely
Exactly. So I
entail?
get what you mean. I get where you were trying to go. Now, from a technical perspective, I got no 100% certainty as to where do you want me to go. And most importantly, once I deliver to you a product, how do I ascertain that it's actually complying with the requirements that you just gave me? Because you haven't even given me a technical requirements to proceed to begin with. And so the first thing that we need to do is to understand that if I go to Norway,
right,
and I speak to them in Portuguese, they are not going to understand me. So if I want an engineer to move the needle towards a certain direction, I'm going to have to speak engineerese, whatever it is, the language, whatever it is, the way that they're going to be understanding what are my needs. And we have so far tried to force them to do the other way around. You should go and try to understand what policymakers try to make. That's not how it's going to work. Because policymaking does not generate technology out of magic. Someone has to sit down and implement it. So you can give them a guideline as to where do you want things to move forward. However, in the end, you still have to provide them with very specific technical specifications as to what do you want me to build and how do I verify that I'm complying with your requirements. And at the moment, that's something that's not really happening.
Exactly. And I think what it's pointing to is perhaps a wider struggle for informational entropy, trying to actually frame what the needs are together with who's building it, which are, like you said, they are in two different silos, and perhaps the coming together beyond just, our technological investments and memorandum signings. That's perhaps the direction we need to move towards.
And the ones who actually pay the price are the final users.
Absolutely.
So on a very quick example, all the data protection laws that are right now passed in the world are basically pieces of paper with very pretty words telling you, this and that should be happening. But there's no actual way to verify compliance in any of them, even GDPR. So there are methods that companies are using to claim that they are compliant, but in the end, the final user, once they install a piece of software that claims to be compliant with this or that data protection law, doesn't really have a mechanism to verify that. As opposed to you buying a car, you don't really have to concern yourself as to whether the brakes function or not, because there's a supply chain that allows, well, all the actors share exactly the same checklist as to how do we make sure that the car, when it is delivered, is compliant with whatever regulations apply in this jurisdiction.
Fantastic.
So me as a user, I only have to concern myself on driving properly, but not as to how the car is built.
Absolutely. Jean, you've made some excellent points there, plenty of food for thought. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that's all we have time for today on NIAGA Spotlight with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. We'll see you again next Friday with more economic analysis and insights. Here's to a productive week ahead.